When my husband insulted me for the 9th time, calling me an idiot in French while speaking with his mistress, I realized that this marriage no longer made sense. So, I accepted an offer from an American company and bought a ticket to New York. The next day, after obtaining my visa, I placed the divorce papers along with my resignation letter on my husband's desk, who was also my boss. He was about to examine the documents carefully, but his mistress complained about a stomachache. Without a second thought, he signed them and left, carrying her in his arms. I didn't look back either. Some time later, on the other side of the ocean, under the New York City skyline, it all became clear to him. Andres cried with red, swollen eyes, but he was never able to find his former wife again. "Mrs. Gonzalez, our team welcomes you to the group," said Marina Alvarez cheerfully after receiving my final confirmation from across the ocean. "When do you plan to start?" I thought for a moment before responding. "I'll be there in 2 weeks." After hanging up, I noticed Esteban Martinez standing behind me, his face grim. "Where are you going?" I looked at him indifferently. "Abroad." Esteban laughed coldly. "Don't be so dramatic. Just because yesterday was our 5th wedding anniversary, and I brought Sophia with me. You're threatening to go abroad?" I didn't give him any further explanation. He had no idea that I had understood the entire conversation he had with Sophia in French at the French restaurant, where he openly discussed his dissatisfaction with me over the past 5 years. Aside from working, doing laundry, and cooking, we have nothing in common. When I talk about enjoying life, she only talks about company benefits. She has no sense of romance. Marrying her is no different from hiring an employee. I deeply regret marrying her. Sophia laughed and replied, jokingly, "If I hadn't gone abroad back then, would you have chosen me instead, Esteban?" Esteban responded sincerely and firmly, "Definitely. In the past, I might have caused a scene, but this time I remained surprisingly calm." I finished the last bite of my plate under the uncomfortable gaze of the waiter, stood up, and said, "Enjoy your conversation. I'm going home." Sophia pretended to stop me. "Laura, Esteban, and I were just talking about work. Don't overthink it." I ignored her and kept walking out, only to hear Esteban's irritated voice. "Don't pay attention to her. She's just paranoid." The only person who caught up with me was the restaurant waiter. He looked at me, hesitating before speaking. "Madam, I think there's something you should know." I smiled at him. "Thank you, but I understood everything." I vaguely remember the waiter's last look, filled with compassion and pity. It was almost tragic. That was when I realized this marriage had to end. After Ethan lectured me and saw that I didn't react, he lost steam and changed the subject. "Sophia plans to join our company. I'll have her take over your position. After all, she was an outstanding student abroad, much more capable than you. If you still want to work, you can be Sophia's secretary and assist her. Otherwise, just be a full-time housewife." He spoke while studying my expression, already planning my resignation. Internally, I felt relief at his words. He was offering me the perfect excuse as I contemplated how to explain my departure. Without hesitation, I agreed. "Fine, I'll resign, and let her be the CEO." Thinking I was speaking out of anger or contradiction, Ethan casually reassured me. "Not letting you work is for your own good. How many women envy that lifestyle? I'll soon take you on a trip to relax." I shook my head to refuse. "If you truly cared, you'd accompany me to the orphanage to see the director this week." Ethan agreed. "All right, it's been a while since I last saw the director too." Ethan and I grew up in the same orphanage. Girls mature faster than boys, so whenever someone bullied him, I protected him. Back then, Ethan would look at me with his bright eyes and say, "When I grow up, I'll protect you. I'll always be good to you." Unfortunately, always is too long, and empty promises are too fragile. Ethan didn't keep his word in college. He changed. The dazzling city blinded him, and he fell for Sophia, the star of the French department. From the moment Ethan chose French classes just for her, I should have known. But Sophia, with her striking presence, wasn't drawn to Ethan at first, and instead went abroad with a wealthy heir. Now, with Ethan's success and fortune, my once bright rose had wilted, highlighting Sophia's allure. The next day, I went to the office to collect my belongings. Along the way, employees gave me different looks. At some point, close colleagues approached me silently. "Marina Liu brought this woman into your office early and ordered your things to be moved immediately. What's going on?" I nodded to show I understood and gave a reassuring pat on her hand. As I entered the office, I saw that my belongings had been removed, with my wedding photo with Ethan tossed into the trash. Sophia looked at me with smug satisfaction. "Sorry, Mrs. Liu. Ethan insisted on doing this quickly, so they cleaned up this morning." She lowered her head, feigning surprise upon seeing the photo in the trash. "Oh, who carelessly threw away your wedding photo with Ethan?" She picked it up and handed it to me. I took it, removed the picture from the frame, and tore it into pieces. "No need to pick up trash." From behind came Ethan's surprised shout. "Lena, what are you doing? How could you tear up this photo?" He rushed to pick up the torn pieces, trying to piece them back together. But broken things can never fully return to their original state, just like the feelings between Ethan and me. I used to treasure that photo deeply. When we got married, Ethan's business was just starting out, and we were poor after buying our wedding rings. With no money left over, I said, "We don't need wedding photos. We can do it later." But Ethan insisted. "I don't want you to feel like you missed out by marrying me." To pay for that set of portraits, he worked 10 sleepless nights doing odd jobs. Thinking about it now, that set of photos didn't cost much, a little over $1,000, less than the cost of one of Ethan's ties now. Yet it was that set of photos that convinced me to marry him, even though I knew about his brief lapse in judgment. But the facts prove that once cracks appear, it's better to let go early. Ignoring Ethan's hysteria, I casually pulled out a document. "Here are my resignation papers. Sign them." Seeing my calm demeanor from last night until now, a rare flicker of anxiety crossed Ethan's face. He took the papers and looked them over. "If you don't want to resign, we can talk it over. I'll arrange another position for Sophia." Panicking that her opportunity might disappear, Sophia clung to Ethan's sleeve, whining. "Ethan?" Unusually, Ethan ignored her and looked at me expectantly. I gave a faint smile, still calm and distant. "No need. I've done enough in this job over the years." Ethan gritted his teeth, a look of determination crossing his face as he slammed the table. "Fine, if that's what you want. Don't regret it." He opened the agreement to read it carefully, but before he could, Sophia clutched her stomach. "Ethan, my stomach hurts. Quickly. Sign this and take me to the hospital." Ethan signed hastily and rushed out with Sophia in his arms. I looked at the resignation papers on the desk and finally felt relieved. Among them was the divorce agreement. From the moment he signed it, he became a stranger to me. I went home, systematically organized my belongings, taking what I could and discarding everything connected to him and this house. I erased every trace of our life together. The 1,000 origami stars he folded for me when we were 13, the love letters from when we were 18, the gold ring he spent all his money on for our proposal, without love. These treasures now seemed so cheap. Ethan returned around 8 p.m., looking like he had traveled far. Seeing the noticeably emptier place, he frowned and noticed my packed luggage. "What are you doing?" I made a casual excuse. "There's too much clutter in the house, so I'm cleaning." He opened the closet skeptically and saw only his clothes. "Where are your things?" I smiled. "You told me to be a housewife, remember? My things are old, so I'm throwing them out to buy new ones." Ethan chuckled disdainfully. "Well, you certainly don't mind spending my money, but go ahead and buy what you want." "Oh, I've cleared my schedule to go with you to the orphanage tomorrow." I agreed. "All right." After growing up together, I still wanted to say goodbye to Elle with dignity in our final farewell. The next day, Ethan came home early from work, something rare for him. I was in the kitchen, going over the final details of my suitcase. I noticed his figure standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed and a calculating expression on his face. He seemed to want to say something, but didn't know how to start. I continued folding my clothes carefully, ignoring his presence. He finally broke the silence. "Lena, I've been thinking." He paused, as if the words weighed more than expected. Are you sure about what you're doing? I looked at him over my shoulder, trying to contain the rage boiling inside me. Sure about what, Ethan? About leaving someone who clearly doesn't respect me anymore? About not wanting to spend more years being replaced for any excuse? Yes, I'm sure. His face tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. Finally, he sighed and changed his tone. It wasn't my intention for things to get to this point. I thought that over time you'd understand. I dropped the blouse I was folding and turned to him, unable to believe what I was hearing. Understand what, Ethan? That you emotionally betrayed me and devalued me as a person? That you chose a mistress over me and still think I should accept it? He rubbed his temples as if tired and responded with an exasperated tone. Lena, I never said you had to accept it. I don't know how we got here. Maybe you shut yourself off too much, focused too much on work, and we both got lost. I let out a dry laugh, devoid of humor. So now it's my fault? Of course, Ethan. It's always easier to blame the other person, isn't it? He took a few steps toward me, raising his hands as if trying to defuse the situation. I'm not saying that. I just think we're making a huge mistake by throwing everything away. I crossed my arms, standing firm. The only thing that got thrown away here, Ethan, was my respect for you. And honestly, that ended a long time ago, you just didn't notice. The silence between us was heavy. For a moment, I thought he would give up and leave the kitchen, but he stayed, as if searching for one last card to play. And what about the orphanage? He asked, his tone now softer. Elle, you know how much she means to both of us. I took a deep breath, trying to control the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I'll go to the orphanage, Ethan. Not for you, but for Elle. She deserves a proper goodbye, and I'm not going to mix my personal wounds with our childhood history. He seemed about to say something but stopped. Instead, he turned and left the kitchen, leaving the air thick with tension. The next morning, we went to the orphanage together. The drive was silent, with only the hum of the engine filling the space between us. When we arrived, Elle greeted us with her warm smile, as always. But when she looked at me, she seemed to notice something different. While Ethan spoke with her, I decided to step away and take one last walk around the place. Every corner of that site held a memory, a piece of my childhood I once thought eternal. Elle found me standing under the old tree where Ethan used to promise he'd protect me forever. She approached and gently took my hand. Dear, what's going on? She asked, her tone full of concern. I looked at her and, for the first time in a long time, let the tears fall. I'm leaving, Elle. I can't stay here, living a life that isn't mine. She embraced me tightly, without saying a word. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than any speech. When we got back home, Ethan noticed that something had changed in me. My suitcase was already packed, and I was just waiting for the taxi to arrive. He tried to convince me one last time, but I was beyond any attempt at reconciliation. There's no turning back, Ethan. My voice was firm, but carried a weariness I didn't even know I had. I've tried for so long. Now it's my turn to think about myself. The taxi arrived, and he stood in the doorway, watching me get into the car with a hollow look in his eyes. There were no dramatic goodbyes or last words. Just the sound of the car door closing, marking the end of a story that had ended long ago, though I finally had the courage to walk away. As the car drove off, I felt a mixture of relief and pain. Losing something that was once so important is never easy, but sometimes it's necessary. I knew the future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was completely mine. When the taxi dropped me off at the airport, I felt a blend of relief and determination. I knew I was leaving behind a life that suffocated me, but I also knew starting over wouldn't be easy. Still, that didn't scare me. I'd faced challenges before, and this would just be one more. When I arrived in my new city, I focused entirely on rebuilding my life. I started with the basics, rented a small apartment, bought simple furniture, and threw myself into my new job. My team welcomed me warmly, and Marina, my new boss, showed from the beginning that she trusted my potential. Within a few months, I not only adapted but began to excel. The strategic decisions I made on major projects started yielding significant results for the company. Marina promoted me quickly, and my confidence began to blossom again. For the first time in years, I felt that my opinions were valued and my efforts recognized. Meanwhile, news about Ethan began to reach me unexpectedly. Former colleagues sent me updates, not out of curiosity, but indignation. "Lena, you won't believe it. Ethan is lost without you," read one message. "That Sophia woman has no idea how to run the company." Over time, it became clear that my absence had left a huge void in his business. Sophia, despite all her arrogance, lacked the skills needed to take control. Major projects were lost, key clients jumped ship, and the company's reputation began to crumble. On the other hand, my career was on the rise. Marina suggested I use my experience to start something of my own, and the idea excited me. With her support and that of a few trusted investors, I launched my own consultancy. In no time, I began working with major clients and building a solid reputation in the market. That's when something unexpected happened. One day, while I was in a meeting, I received an email directly from Ethan. "Lena, we need to talk." I chuckled to myself, incredulous at his audacity. I ignored the message, but he didn't give up. He kept sending emails and even tried calling me. When I finally responded, his voice was a mixture of desperation and regret. "Lena, please, I made a mistake," he said, almost begging. "The company is in ruins. Sophia left. I need your help." For a moment, I wondered if I should feel pity. But then I remembered all the times he humiliated me, the betrayals, the disrespect. I took a deep breath and calmly replied, "Ethan, you made your choices. Now face the consequences. I finally have the life I deserve, and there's no room for you in it." I hung up before he could respond. The feeling was liberating. A few months later, I learned that Ethan's company had declared bankruptcy. He lost everything: the luxurious house, the cars, and even the little respect he had left in the market. Meanwhile, my consultancy continued to grow, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. On my birthday, I hosted a small celebration with friends and colleagues. Marina gave a heartfelt speech, highlighting my resilience and strength. I looked around, seeing all the people who were now part of my life, and realized just how far I had come. Ethan had tried to destroy me, but in the end, I was the one who came out on top. And him? He was left drowning in the consequences of his own choices. At last, I was free to live, to dream, and to build the life I had always deserved.